Catus, Maximus here, this time with a little review of DeWalt's right angle driver, 1/4 inch hex, impact rated. So both DeWalt and at least Milwaukee and a lot of the stores have similar units. I went for the DeWalt because it has a metal front end. And these things are actually surprisingly cheap. This thing was like $17. And Milwaukee's a couple dollars more. I think it's about 20 bucks. But they are advertising these as being impact rated, although I've done a lot of research, and these little gears with how powerful modern impact drivers are, unfortunately just don't last that long. Let's get this open here. And so mainly I use these with drills. Only impacts in certain situations because I don't want to be replacing them all the time. And that's really the crux of them, is they're just trying to push these little things just a little bit too far. It is pretty heavy. It does feel pretty nice. I like the texturing on top. And I was just noticing a little feature. They don't even advertise this, although I think that's incredibly smart. Oftentimes the bits will get jammed in impact drivers. And on these, it's surprising. It does have a magnetic. It has two magnets. It has a magnet there and one to retain the bit. So the idea is that you could put in a real short bit like this. It barely sticks out, but it does stick out enough for you to be able to put a screw on there, and it's close enough to that magnet to actually hold it. And I think that's pretty wise. But you'd say, gosh, well, then now that bit is just about impossible to get out. And I think this is pretty interesting. That back magnet's actually loose, and you can just use a screw or something to push it forward to pull it out. That's actually pretty smart, and I like that a lot. But of course, it's also deep enough to really hold the two. It's really more meant for these 2-inch bits. But I do like the fact that you can put in a 1-inch bit and be able to remove it. As far as how well it moves, it feels pretty smooth. That's just fine. There's not much. There's a little bit of in and out play. There's a bit of play in there. Not quite the same as that old heavy-duty all-metal Milwaukee one. That's one of the best. But overall, I think this little thing's pretty neat. I kind of want to give it a shot and take it apart. It does look like it has a ball bearing, and then there is a snap ring in there. It's not really, it's a snap ring, but it doesn't have eyes. These are just about impossible to get out of these grooves because they go right into that recess. But we'll try pulling off the head and taking a look at the gears. That was something I was afraid of. This whole gearbox is actually pressed onto the plastic housing, and then they use a couple extra screws just to help keep it retained. But this thing is really on there. You're going to really have to hammer it off. Now, even though there is a little bit of play in the input, I probably should mention that the output shaft on this, if we can get a little bit of focus, is actually pretty tight. Just a little bit of end play, so that's definitely satisfying. The shaft is definitely much tighter than the input, so that's probably the important point. I can tell you, after fiddling with this, even when I pull this in and out, I don't feel a difference in the backlash of the gears. This is actually pressed into some other collar in there, so it must be some kind of just a hex shaft that connects to another shaft that's right in the gearbox itself. And so maybe that's intentional, because as it's impacting, this is just taking up just a little bit of the energy and maybe trying to help keep the gearbox from lasting a little bit longer. But anyway, when I use these, I usually use screws that are, Robertson square drive, or use Torx drive screws. Anything that's not a Phillips, or you have to maintain a huge amount of pressure in order to maintain traction on the fastener. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate this with a power drill, just because, using an impact, with these, personally, they only last so long under those conditions, so you really use it when you need to. But they can be handy, especially if you're running spade bits or something like that. Even though this may be a little bit difficult to grip, it can help you in a pinch, and that's kind of the whole purpose of these things. And of course, they're great with even hand screwdrivers when you're trying to access any type of tight location. That's why I like these things too. Automotive applications, a variety of situations where you want tight access. All right, we'll do a quick little demonstration here. I do have way too long of an extension on here. Oh, come on. Pretty difficult to actually start screws with this thing, because it's just so hard to, even though you're right on top of it, it's hard just to keep the screws straight. There we go. And then really, and this is another reason I use these with drill versus impact, because I just have the hardest time keeping them in there when it's bouncing around with the impact driver. And this is kind of the point of these things, is if you really have to drill, like run in heavy deck screws or something like that, it's going to be a little bit of an adventure regardless if you're using a drill or an impact driver. And see, what's happening is it's just now reaching so much resistance here that when I'm trying to turn it, it's actually just pushing over, really trying to rotate over like that. It's just really so hard that it's just popping out of the screw. So anyway, I have no idea where my Milwaukee one was, but the big deal of that Milwaukee is that because it had that locking long handle, so you could pull that handle up, lock it, and it gave you just a whole bunch more lateral control. You could have it was rotatable, so you can stick it off the top or to the side, and it gives you your actual handle to hold on to prevent these adapters from wanting to roll over like that. So anyway, I think these tools are pretty neat for what they are, but these super compact ones really end up, at least for me, whether you're using a drill or an impact driver, end up being pretty cumbersome if you need to drill any kind of holes or run any kind of screws that require quite a bit of power, because they just want to fall out. It's just such a little head for you to control. And when you have the force going over 90 degrees, then of course when it jams up, the twisting force here and with the anvil getting a lot of resistance translates into it just really wanting to rock over. And with this much space, you really just don't have enough grip to prevent that from happening. If you're running 3-inch deck screws in old dry timber, you're going to have an adventure. But these things can be invaluable. They can help, if you have nothing else, you can try them. And they may save you in a few situations. Electricians who are working on hex fasteners, you'll have just a little bit more luck with these. So they, for how cheap they are, particularly this DeWalt one, it does feel pretty nice and heavy duty, and can be handy in a variety of, in electrical boxes, service situations to give you that right angle. But, I think just wouldn't expect it to magically make something super easy peasy. It just can sometimes make situations that are otherwise just totally impossible, or you're using a manual ratchet trying to run in the screw, that they can help you in those. And this DeWalt one, really, like I said, it isn't too bad. The spindle is actually pretty nice and stiff, even though they did something weird with the input and the cast metal head, and really being able to accept 1-inch bits and having that ejection hole is actually a pretty smart design, so I like it for that. The Milwaukee one's a little bit more square, and now I'm understanding why Milwaukee did that, because it just gives you a little bit more purchase on it and to prevent it from rolling. So to tell you the truth, even though the Milwaukee seemed to be all plastic, it may actually be just a little bit easier to use just because you can maintain a more solid grip. Even though this one's more contoured and certainly a lot more comfortable, it allows it to roll out of your hand. So anyway, that was my little review of this DeWalt right angle adapter. I've always been curious about these new generation ones, and I think, like I said, I think they're just fine, but maybe they kind of push these more as being just a really easy to use go-to tool, when really they're not. And like a right angle, if you're doing a lot of really confined fastening, then you're going to be better off with the variety of right angle impact drivers they make now. They make all sorts of 1/4-inch hex impact drivers that kind of look like electric ratchets, allow you to get into those tighter spaces, and those are going to work out a lot better than trying to run one of these, just because it's a separate independent floating unit. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.